Welcome to our community church, Unitarian Universalist. I'm your worship associate, Sally Jackson, and it is a joy to be with you, in person and virtually. So, who are we at Community Church? We're a progressive, open-minded, and inclusive religious community. We welcome all who are on a spiritual search for truth and meaning. Ours is faith in action, and we do the work of social justice and elevate compassion in our quest to live ethically, recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every being. Please look to your weekly email for announcements, and we have a couple for you now.
Good morning, everyone. I had a few announcements myself here. I wanted to let you know, some of you know our work with a collective clergy and church group called Together New Orleans. We're citywide, actually statewide, engaged in Get Out the Vote and looking for some folks that might want to work with me and our social justice ministry committee. And let me know. I also put out front, if you need to change your address or just moved here and want to register to vote, there are forms that I have and out front. So please let me know if you want to get further involved with Get Out the Vote leading up to Election Day. Another announcement I wanted to make is that I have been sharing some information about the Wellspring program, a Unitarian Universalist course that's going to be happening Wednesday nights, every other Wednesday. We're going to start in about November. But we're also going to add a Tuesday morning class specifically on environmental issues, being inspired by the book Braiding Sweetgrass by author Robin Wall Kimmerer. And also a reminder that on October 30th, we're going to do Blessing of the Animals. So I think there's another announcement that Mary Ann, yeah, you want to come up? Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. This is the month in which we do the fundraising for next year, as you all know. And every Sunday during October, we invite someone to give a testimonial as to why community church is important to them, why they contribute, and why they keep coming. And this Sunday, Alicia Cook was supposed to do it, but something came up and she couldn't make it. And so here I am. You get to see me, and I'm not going to say too much about why the church is important to me. I mean, you can see that I've dedicated a lot of time to it. But I did show up here in 1990, which was a long time ago. And the thing that impressed me so much was this was a church that was run basically by the members. There was no Vatican to send you money or to help you or the Archdiocese. This was it. And the people were so dedicated, and they worked so hard to keep this organization going. Some of the members, we couldn't afford in those days to have staff, so that people did the newsletter. Dorothy Smith used to actually mow the lawn and things like that. And the other thing was there was no creed that you had to believe. It was really about you're finding the right way for yourself and through ethical living. So I got hooked, and here I am. And as I first started off, I gave a very small amount to the church because, you know, it didn't have to have that many resources, and it wasn't that, you know, important to me. But as it became more important to me, and as my resources, you know, jobbing betterment, I was able to give more. So, and I think many of us get on that trajectory where when we start out, we just give a little bit because we're still testing it out. So that's my testimonial. And the other thing I wanted to say is, you know, we have this beautiful tree up here, this graphic that is marking the progress of the campaign, which Cynthia made it. And we're, you know, getting stronger, and the trunk is getting stronger, it's getting darker, and growing all those nutrients going up there. And so we're now at about 44,000. So we need to get, a little bit more, of course. And what we did this week, I think they went out Friday, was the people who did not have a chance to be at the luncheon or to make a commitment, we have sent packets with the information and a self-addressed envelope to make it very convenient for you all. And we also have some financial commitment forms in the lobby. You can ask me if you would like to fill one out. Thank you all very much.
And now we have our chalice lighting. It is Community Church's custom to light a chalice, invoking hope and eternal truth to our worship. Please join us in singing as we light this flame. We light this flame to offer the light of truth and knowledge and the Lord of love and community and the fire of hope and commitment. And now, CCUU's Religious Education Director, Cynthia Ramirez, brings us her Words for All Ages.
Good morning. Is this on? Okay, let me get closer. Okay, in honor of Indigenous Day, I'm going to be reading a woodland Indian myth. I love the Indian myths. And this one is Wise Owl. There is an old saying, wise as an owl. People are always saying that, but the truth is, owls were not always wise. Once upon a time, long ago, the everything maker was very busy making all the animals and all the plants and all the rocks and caverns and everything else that covered the earth. Owl had not been made. He had been given a voice. He had 2 eyes, a head, a body, and strong wings. Owl was waiting his turn to be formed. I want a long neck like swan, Owl told the everything maker. I want red feathers like the cardinal and a beak like hawk. Yes, yes, mumbled the everything maker. Whatever you want. But you must wait your turn. The everything maker looked sharply at Owl. Your eyes are open again. You know that no one is allowed to watch me work. Turn around and close your eyes. I have no time for you. I am busy creating Rabbit. The everything maker turned his attention back to Rabbit, who was shaking with nervousness. And what do you want, little Rabbit? The everything maker asked, encouragingly. Long legs and ears, Rabbit spoke softly, and fangs. Could I possibly have a fang or 2? And claws. I would dearly love to have claws. The everything maker smiled. I think we can imagine some claws and fangs. He smoothed Rabbit's long legs and ears. Silly Rabbit, Owl hooted loudly. Why don't you ask for something useful like wisdom? This is your last warning. Be quiet and wait your turn. Owl twisted around and glared at the everything maker. You have to do it, he hooted. You have to give us what we ask. I demand wisdom. I warned you, Owl, shouted the everything maker. He shoved Owl's head down into his body, which made Owl's head and neck disappear. He gave Owl a shake, which made the owl's eyes widen in fright. He pulled Owl's ears until he stuck out from his head. The everything maker snapped his fingers. I have made your ears big, the better to listen. I have made your eyes big, the better to see. And I have made your neck short, better to hold up your head. I have packed your head with wisdom, and as you have asked, now use your wisdom and fly away before you lose what I have given. Owl was no longer a fool. He flew quickly away, pouting and hooting. The everything maker turned back to Owl, smiling gently. Claws, he reminded himself. But Rabbit was gone. Rabbit had hopped hurriedly away, too afraid of the everything maker to stay for his fangs and claws. As for the owl, Owl knew he angered the everything maker. As for Owl, Owl knew if he angered the everything maker again, he would lose all that he had gained. Even today, Owl only comes out at night when the everything maker is fast asleep. As for Rabbit, his claws and fangs are waiting, perhaps someday. Thank you.
Our first reading is an excerpt from Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Okay. Children, language, lands, almost everything was stripped away, stolen when you weren't looking because you were trying to stay alive. In the face of such loss, one thing our people could not surrender was the meaning of land. In the settler mind, land was property, real estate, capital, or natural resources. But to our people, it was everything: identity, the connection to our ancestors, the home to our non-human kinfolk, our pharmacy, our library. The source to the world was enacted, sacred ground. In the old times, our elders say the trees talked to each other. They'd stand in their own council and craft a plan. But scientists decided long ago the plants were deaf and mute. Locked in isolation without communication, the possibility of conversation was summarily dismissed. Science pretends to be purely rational, completely neutral, a system of knowledge making in which the observation is independent of the observer. And yet the conclusion was drawn that plants cannot communicate because they lack the mechanism that animals use to speak. The potential for plants were seen purely through the lens of animal capacity. Until quite recently, no one seriously explored the possibility that plants might speak to one another. But pollen has been carried reliably on the wind for eons, communicated by males to receptive females to make those very nuts. And the wind can be trusted with that fecund responsibility. Why not with messages? There is now compelling evidence that our elders were right. The trees are talking to one another. They communicate via pheromones, hormone-like compounds that are wafted on the breeze, laden with meaning. Tree conversations are still far above our heads. We reciprocate the gift of the pecan grove by taking care of the grove, protecting it from harm, planting seeds so the new groves will shade the prairie and feed the squirrels. Now, 2 generations later, after removal, after allotment, after the boarding schools, after diaspora, my family returns to Oklahoma, to what is left of my grandfather's allotment. From the hilltop, you can still see the pecan groves along the river. At night, we dance on the old powwow grounds. The ancient ceremonies greet the sunrise. The smell of corn soup and the sound of drums fill the air as the 9 bands of Potawatomi, scattered across the country by this history of removal, come together again for a few days each year in a search for belonging. The Potawatomi gathering of nations reunites the people, an antidote to the divide and conquer strategy that was used to separate our people from each other and our homelands. Now we come to the time for our joys and sorrows. It's a sacred time, these joys and sorrows. If you're online, please write your joys and sorrows in the comments section to be read aloud. If you're in person, there are cards of joys and sorrows in our foyer. If you are not able to fill one out earlier, please feel free to do so during our musical interlude. We thank you.
For our musical interlude, we're going to be singing hymn 174, 174, O Earth, your surpassing prayer.
Okay. Small print. This is from Laura Miller. It said, I find myself suddenly and deeply mourning the unexpected loss of an old friend and high school classmate who passed on Monday. Well, we light a candle for that sorrow. Is there another one? Oh, you have one? You want to do it yourself? Come on up.
I have a joy. At 1:04 yesterday, I became a grand aunt again to a bouncing baby boy. My nephew had a little boy yesterday. Thank you. Bye.
I have a sorrow to share, and it's from our from the radio station I work for, WHIV LP. One of our hosts on our shows, Leonore, can't remember how to pronounce her last name right now, but she was had a show on the air called The Art of Kindness, and she embodied that, and she will be greatly missed. They had a second line for her last night about 5 o'clock, but she was always there whenever anybody needed her, and we will miss that. So when I've said many times at the end of a benediction, I'd say, be kind, that was Nilani's influence. So I wanted to share it with everybody. Okay. Are there any others? You have one? Yeah, come on up so they can hear you at home too.
I have two sorrows, not to be redundant, but I think our heart all goes out to Hurricane Ian, to the Florida people, since we really do have sincere empathy for all that they're going through. And then a friend of mine, in fact, who I visited in August, a high school friend who lives in Punta Gorda. Luckily, she and her 99-year-old dad were fairly okay. They did evacuate, but at the same time, Ian Smith, my friend's brother, was living on a 50-foot sailboat in French Polynesia, and he drowned. He had pneumonia, and he was transferring from their large sailboat to the dinghy, and he just didn't have enough strength. So yes, that's it.
Do you have any? We'll light 2 more candles. One for the joy still bubbling up, too new to share, and one for the sorrows that we cannot yet put into words. Know that we love you and hold you in our hearts.
I overlooked some opening words I wanted to share with you around the announcement time. One of the things that I would like this congregation to begin is the practice of land acknowledgement. And for those who might not be familiar with that practice, I will just share what that is. And this is from the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, of why introduce the practice of land acknowledgement. Offer recognition and respect. Counter the doctrine of discovery with the true story of the people who were already here. Create a broader public awareness of the history that has led to this moment. Begin to repair relationships with Native communities and with this land. Support larger truth-telling and reconciliation efforts. Remind people that colonization is an ongoing process with native lands still occupied due to deceptive and broken treaties. Take a cue from Indigenous protocol, opening up space with reverence and respect, and to inspire action and relationship. So an example of introducing the practice of land acknowledgement would be, we gratefully acknowledge the native peoples of whose ancestral homeland we gather, the land of the Chitimacha, the Natchez, the Huma, the Choctaw, among other tribes, and we stand here on sacred ground. Another reading this morning is from Joy Harjo of the Muskegee tribe. She has a poem for the calling the spirit back from wandering the earth in its human feet. Put down that bag of potato chips, that white bread, that bottle of pop. Turn off that cell phone, computer, and remote control. Open the door, then close it behind you. Take a breath offered by friendly winds. They travel the earth, gathering essences of plants to clean. Give it back with gratitude. If you sing, it will give your spirit lift to fly to the stars' ears and back. Acknowledge this earth who has cared for you since you were a dream planting itself precisely within your parents' desire. Let your moccasin feet take you to the encampment of the guardians who have known you before time, who will be there after time. They sit before the fire that has been there without time. Let the earth stabilize your post-colonial insecure jitters. Be respectful of the small insects, birds, and animal people who accompany you. Ask for their forgiveness for the harm we humans have brought down upon them. Don't worry. The hearts know the way, though there might be high-rises, interstates, checkpoints, armed soldiers, massacres, wars, and those who will despise you because they despise themselves. The journey might take you a few hours, a day, a year, a few years, 100, 1,000, or even more. Watch your mind. Without training, it might run away and leave your heart for the immense human feast set by the thieves of time. Don't hold regrets. When you find your way back to the circle, to the fire kept burning by the keepers of your soul, you will be welcomed. You must clean yourself with cedar sage or other healing plants. Cut the ties you have to failure and shame. Let go the pain you are holding in your mind, your shoulders, your heart, all the way to your feet. Let go of the pain of your ancestors to make way for those who are heeding in our direction. Ask for forgiveness. Call upon the help of those who love you. These helpers take many forms: animal, element, bird, angel, saint, stone, and ancestor. Call your spirit back. It might be caught in corners and creases of shame, judgment, and human abuse. You must call in a way that your spirit will want to return. Speak to it as you would a beloved child. Welcome your spirit back from its wandering. It may return in pieces, in tatters. Gather them together. They will be happy to be found after being lost for so long. Your spirit will need to sleep a while after it's bathed and given clean clothes. Now you have a party. Invite everyone you know who loves and supports you. Keep room for those who have no other place to go. Make a giveaway, a remember, keep the speeches short. Then you must do this. Help the next person find their way through the dark. So today, or tomorrow, Monday the 10th, we pay respect to the indigenous cultures of this country and here in this region, known as Indigenous Peoples Day, and is recognized in much of this country, with many municipalities and states no longer wishing to recognize Columbus Day as a national holiday. So we will explore, how do our Unitarian Universalist principles support a more just and equitable existence for Indigenous peoples of this land? Hawaii, Alaska, Vermont, New Mexico, Washington, Oregon are examples of states or municipalities where there is an official recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day. Yet, Columbus Day remains an official national holiday and became an official holiday in 1971, with major efforts beginning to recognize this as a national holiday in 1937, celebrating the day Christopher Columbus came to the Americas in 1492. This was just the beginning of what was to come, of much pain for so many in centuries to come. Under President Lincoln in the late 1800s, land-poor whites were encouraged to settle west of the Mississippi, and before that, east to the Mississippi, before Lincoln became president. In the early 1800s, U.S. General Thomas Jessup, under President Andrew Jackson, referring to indigenous people, stated, "The country can be rid of them only by exterminating them." Trading routes at this time were cut off to prior trading routes with the Spanish and French, with the United States being their only possible trading partner. And the government had Native people acquire debt for goods instead of the more traditional trade that was established at the time. This resulted in Native peoples acquiring debt with the United States government, lending them what they were able to get sustainably with other trading partners. Then that land was taken for debt payment, if not outright stolen. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, in her book, An Indigenous People's History of the United States, writes, "By then, Jackson was finishing his second term as the most popular president of the United States to that date, and the policy of genocide was embedded in the highest office of the U.S. government. Jackson, who was a general in Tennessee before being U.S. president, stated about the Battle of the Horseshoe Bend, an event when indigenous lands became plantations and slave-owning states, as they were defending their family and homes. Again, he said, "The friends of the Tallapoosa, or the Muskegees, will no longer murder our women and children or disturb the quiet of our borders. They have disappeared from the face of this earth. How lamentable it is that the path to peace should lead through blood and over the carcasses of the slain. But it is in the dispensation of that providence which inflicts partial evil to produce the general great good." So genocide was a strategy, and Jackson rationalized it for the greater good. Accompanying genocide were mandatory boarding schools with attempted teachings that attempted to erase the memory of children's families and cultures, as well as the theft of land. Hundreds of treaties at this time were never acknowledged or were broken, with 371 documented treaties by 1871. 1871 was also the year of the Indian Appropriation Act. This erased all treaties or acknowledgement of natives of having independent boundaries. Currently, the United States has 1.9 billion acres. By 1881, Indian land holdings were down to 156 million acres. By 1934, only 50 million acres remained. Indigenous people, by the 20th century, had only 2.3% of their original land and under the borders of the United States, no longer as independent nations. There are now 3 million Indigenous people in the United States. There were once over 15 million Indigenous people in what is now known as the United States. So to help in the math, that equates to 80% of a population being systematically exterminated. This land has been stolen by the United States, as well as other colonial powers over the last 500 years. Jody Bird of the Chickasaw Nation writes, "The story of the New World is horror, the story of America, a crime." Indigenous people see the United States as having a legacy of settler colonialism that can be seen in the endless wars of aggression and occupation. There has always been the story of the oppressor who ignores or rationalizes harm done, handed down through written and verbal one-sided histories. And with power and privilege, that one-sided story perpetuates decade after decade, generation after generation, century after century. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, "Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed." No one typically gives up power, and no one typically likes acknowledging they have benefited from that power. For many of us who grew up in this country, particularly whites, many of our history lessons in grade school had romanticized teachings of what Columbus and our forefathers did in how they phrased it, creating, building, or establishing the United States of America, land of the free, home of the brave. But the reality is, we are here on stolen land. And we sang the hymn, "All Who Boast It Is," earlier, with those words saying, "All who boast it is that we come from our forebears brave and free. If there breathe on earth a slave, are we truly free and brave?" These lyrics were written in the mid-1800s, leading up to the Civil War. Just as World War II ended, Roland Bainton writes a biography about Michael Servetus titled Hunted Heretic, which some of you have read. Servetus is, in his bold quest for a free search for truth and meaning, was the inspiration for our Unitarian faith. Bainton writes at length about the heroic efforts to keep freedom of faith alive in some very dark times and how Servetus paid with his life of defiance of mandating someone else's faith into his life, and was burned at the stake for having the audacity at the time to say that every human should have a free belief in how he chooses to practice his faith, not a religion that has a set of dogma mandated by the state of Rome. Bainton writes how Unitarian Universalists champion tolerance and those values of Servetus, and who were aghast at the idea of a man being burned for his promotion of freedom of religion. Yet, these same people, these same Unitarian Universalists, who are aghast, turned away when cities and hundreds of thousands of people died to nuclear weapons by their own government. How does the life of those of us who have benefited from the genocide of Indigenous people, such as the existence of private property, as we live on stolen land and a land tilled and an infrastructure as we live on stolen land, this land that has changed through white man's occupation, as well as the infrastructure of communities built by the sweat and blood of black bodies. How do we continue to boast that we are free people? When Jim Crow continues in our prison systems, how can we boast to be free people? As Martin Luther King stated, no one is free until we are all free. Our interconnected existence, of which we are all a part, whether we experience this directly, know it through the studies of quantum physics, or the wisdom of many faiths, we can't be free when others in our community suffer. Of our propensity of individualism to ignore the interconnectedness, this hymn continues. There are slaves who dare not be in right with 2 or 3. The freedom of Western European peoples, escaping violence and oppression, passed on their trauma to others and continues to this day through policies that remain, policies that have our country in a state of inequality. Even colonizing is a soft word for what really happened, or the term settled or expanding our country, because it was on the back of a genocide of people. Slavery of Africans was also overlapping with this genocide of indigenous people. 20% of slaves died in cargo ships as they were packed in ships for efficiency. And for those who survived the oppression of slavery would meet them at the shores of this side of the Atlantic. The stories of the noble slaveholder, the peaceful exchanges of natives and white settlers, of our white youth, has perpetuated over the centuries and how a group of oppressors want to remember themselves. The idea that the words that Jackson said of intentional extermination of a people has been erased from our minds, and hence a dishonest current assessment of how this country was built remains for too many. Hence, there remains the continued colonization mindset that dominates Native American policies in this country. Our Unitarian Universalist principles can guide us to a more honest relationship with our past. Our 6th principle says, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. This principle highlights the inherent worth of every human and lends itself to an emphasis on world community. We can't prioritize the comfort of one group of people over another, especially when it is defined on intentional use of destructive power and the outright theft of land through violence. In the face of injustice, tragedy, and atrocities of the world, how do we use our faith in seeking justice? Our 7th principle states respect for the interdependent web of all of existence of which we are part. It is an all-encompassing statement. We also have a proposed 8th principle that mentions building beloved community and to dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. We can begin to dismantle oppressions in our institutions more easily if we have a more honest and accurate understanding of where we engage systematically in the role of oppressor versus the oppressed. We can do that by listening to others' stories, hearing history through the lens of those who have been oppressed. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz writes, how then can U.S. society come to terms with its past? How can it acknowledge responsibility? The late Native historian Jack Forbes always stressed that while living persons aren't responsible for what their ancestors did, they are responsible for the society that they live in, which is a product of the past. Assuming this responsibility provides a means of survival and liberation. She continues to say that a process of healing can rightfully start by honoring the treaties the United States made with Indigenous nations, by restoring all sacred sites, starting with the Black Hills and including most federally held parks and land, and all stolen sacred items and body parts, such as what is being held in museums, and by payment of sufficient reparations of the reconstruction and expansion of Native nations. Indigenous peoples offer possibilities for life after empire, possibilities that neither erase the crimes of colonialism nor require the disappearance of the original people colonized. For the future to be realized, it will require extensive educational programs and the full support and active participation of the descendants of settlers, enslaved Africans, and colonized Mexicans, as well as immigrant populations. And the practice of land acknowledgement is one step that can guide in our words and actions. And I'll repeat those. To offer recognition and respect, counter the doctrine of discovery with the true story of the people who are already here, create broader public awareness of the history that has led to this moment, begin to repair relations with Native communities and with the land, support larger truth-telling and reconciliation efforts, remind people that colonization is an ongoing process, to take a cue from Indigenous protocol, opening space with reverence and respect, and inspire action and relationship. Let us live out our principles so that we can do the work in repairing harm, doing justice, and embracing our interdependent web of existence of which we are part. I end this sermon with a quote from Pueblo author Simon Ortiz, who writes, "The future will not be made with loss and waste, though the memory will be there. Eyes will become kind and deep, and the bones of this nation will mend after the revolution." Ortiz is not calling for a revolution of violence, but a revolution of the spirit, a revolution of honest education, a revolution of redemption, a revolution of right relations, a revolution of justice, and a revolution of love. May it be so, and amen. Our closing words are again from Robin Wall Kimmerer, from her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. We need acts of restoration, not only for the polluted waters and degraded lands, but also for our relationship to the world. We need to restore honor to the way we live so that when we walk through the world, we don't have to avert our eyes with shame, so that we can hold our heads up high and receive the respectful acknowledgement of the rest of Earth's beings.
For our closing hymn today, we're going to be singing hymn 173, hymn 173.
And before we go, I'm a little out of order this morning. We have our plate collection that we do every Sunday. 50% goes to a cause that this church deeply cares about, and 50% remains here to pursue the mission of this church. For this Sunday, we are going to be donating funds to the Red Flame Hunters. And I want to share a little bit about who they are. And we have a relationship with this group, the Red Flame Hunters, for many years. The mission of the Red Flame Hunters, Mardi Gras Indian tribe, is to preserve, promote, and teach the traditions of the historically Black neighborhoods of New Orleans. The youth and young adult tribe focuses on teaching traditions of the Black masking Indians and second-line club culture to local youth, and give them the opportunity to share the culture through performances and parades with the larger New Orleans community and beyond. So I welcome those of you at home who might be joining online to contribute, and anyone here that would like to add to their pledge and contribute is welcome this morning. And maybe someone can go around collecting, and we'll keep a bowl up front leading up to coffee hour if you'd like. And maybe Nicholas, you could play just an instrumental as we do this. And everyone is welcome to coffee hour in our fellowship hall, and enjoy meeting some of you and reconnecting with others. Thank you so much for coming out this morning.